All right, thank you, Marcy. I guess you're seeing my screen now, and I'm glad you're with us for the next 2 hours. I hope this 2 hours will be helpful to you. These are copyrighted materials, and we are an AIA education provider. Many of you are here for that reason, and this is the slide they've given us to give you a little bit of information about that. You've already read this description. Most likely you're on the webinar now, so I will go ahead to the next slide and show you the cover of the document on which this presentation is based. And it looks like this. It's the 2015 Code Conforming Wood Design document published jointly by the American Wood Council and the International Code Council. And I know that Brian has a link in the handouts part of your webinar dashboard for you to download this. Perhaps you've downloaded this, printed it out. If you have, it may be handy to you as we go through the webinar today. It's become a popular document. It attempts to summarize the fundamentals for wood construction in the International Building Code. This is a document, and this is a webinar about the International Building Code. It's not about the International Residential Code or single-family construction, but about how wood can be used for commercial buildings or buildings that are typically considered commercial and under the International Building Code. Major topics are allowable building size, special occupancies. We will spend quite a bit of time on fire resistance. It's an important issue when it comes to wood construction. Building features is a catch-all in this document. Wood and non-combustible construction types, we'll summarize that. New to this document are structural considerations, and what this primarily concerns are exact descriptions of what is covered by the IBC, and then also descriptions about what our standards cover, the American Wood Council standards, that is, that are referenced by the Building Code, to give you a framework for how they can be used together. And then finally, precautions during construction. Our objectives today, 5 primary objections and a few that, not objections, I'm sorry, objectives, and a few that are not stated here. But when using the International Building Code, the first question to ask is, can you even build it out of wood? So building size limits. Also fire resistance, as I said, precautions during construction, critical topic. Then a catch-all section of various features for wood in the IBC, finishes, trim, appendages, balconies, and so forth, other topics. And then finally, we're going to give you a framework, as I said, for the structural provisions for wood in the IBC. The American Wood Council, you may know it by a previous name, the American Forest and Paper Association. There is still an American Forest and Paper Association. We are a separate entity now. We always have been the same group, though, the membership organization that does primarily 3 things. First of all, we develop state-of-the-art design standards that are referenced in the building code for the design community through our ANSI committees. Also, we assist in code development, and that's where our work touches on the model building codes that are used, mostly the International Building Code, but other ones as well, such as NFPA. And then finally, we provide information related to those 2 through our technology transfer department. These are covers of our 2015 wood frame construction manual and national design specification. Most of you are very familiar with these, and you can find all kinds of information at our website. So we're glad to put on this webinar. I'm glad to be able to present today. The International Code Council, the other author of this summary that we're talking about today, is a very excellent organization, of course. Their own governmental consensus process for developing codes is the primary one, of course, in our country. It's a model, I believe, for private association participation in good public policy. And I think we're fortunate to have such an organization and such a system of codes. We're going to test a audience interaction feature here and give you a polling question. I'd like to know who's listening today. If you could, I'm going to turn it over to Marcy. She's going to ask you this question and you'll be able to respond. Marcy?
Great. All right. You may go ahead right now and vote. Just what is your profession? Are you an architect, engineer, code official, building designer, or other? We've got a lot of material to cover today, folks, so that we're going to not take a whole lot of time on these polls. So if you could quickly vote, I'm not going to give you much time. So I've got 81% that have already voted, so I'm going to go ahead and close and share. We've got 68% engineers, 20% code officials, 6% architects, 5% other, and 1% building designers. All right, Paul?
I'm going to repeat those, Marcia. So 68% engineers, 20% code officials, 6% architects,
5% other, and 1% building designers.
All right, great.
Okay.
Thank you. And thanks for responding to the poll. Very good. Wood has, of course, very distinct advantages. It's a renewable resource. Forests now are sustainably managed. Life cycle assessment shows wood to be good, and there's many issues, of course, why we want to use wood. And more wood is constructed, or more buildings, rather, are constructed of wood than any other material. And wood can be thought of as not only the choice building material of the past, but also of the future. We'll talk about that a little bit as we go. I'm going to go very quickly through these next slides on use and occupancy classification because this is a fundamental decision that is made by the designer along with the code official who has the last say on this. And the basic principles are what's the design purpose of the building, its occupancy, and you match it up to these descriptions. And in this CCWD, and that's how I'll refer to the document, the publication we're speaking about, the 2015 Code Conforming Wood Design. We cover 8 of these in our building sizing tables and other sections of that document. You can use wood, of course, for use group U and use group H even, but those are beyond the scope of this document. Whatever the building's used for, you look at the descriptions, 302.1, and here they are, group A1, performing arts, A2, anything with food and drink, A3, a catch-all for assembly occupancies, Group 4, sports, indoor arenas, skating rinks, swimming pools, and so forth. Group 5, outdoor sporting facilities, grandstands, stadiums, and so forth. Group B, business, is a catch-all for many occupancies that may not fit into something else, but its core description is office, professional, and service type transactions. E, educational, schools primarily, also daycare for children other than infants. Group F, factory, split into 2 use groups, F1, F2, moderate hazard, low hazard. Low hazard implies and assumes non-combustible materials are being manufactured. In each of these use groups, there's lists of these in Chapter 3 to look at for examples. I stands for institutional. I2, perhaps most well-known, hospitals, childcare, including infants. Jails also I3. I4, daycare, special designation use group that has been developed in recent years. And also I1, residential and custodial care. I1 and I3 are further broken into certain conditions based on the capabilities of the people in those occupancies. Group M is mercantile. Here's some examples here. R1, hotels, motels, boarding houses. It's a beautiful photograph of quite a house. R2, apartments, dormitories, live-work units, timeshare, so forth, non-transient residential uses. R3 are single family and two-family dwellings, typically outside the scope of the IBC. So where would R3 come into play in the IBC? Well, if you have a mixed-use building, you might have an R3 apartment above a mercantile or a single-family dwelling attached to a church or something. That's where R3 would come into play, typically in the IBC. R4, relatively new occupancy classification, residential care, and assisted living. There's two conditions. Now in the 2015 code, occupants are capable of responding or they're not, or they need assistance. So there's subcategories for R4. S, storage, similar to F1 and F2, and the pattern is similar. You have moderate hazard and low hazard involving storage of non-combustible materials. However, it can be in combustible packaging. There's examples in 311. I know I went through that quickly, but that's so fundamental to most of you. Once that decision is made, you never return to it typically until you change the use of the building, and then you have to go back to that again. Always consult your code official if there's any question from the very start about the use of the building. If you're, of course, as a consulting engineer or as an architect, you could save yourself a world of trouble by coordinating with the code official at the very start on that, naming your use groups. We do have a system of referenced standards in the international code system. And of course, reference standards do take the force of law, just like the building code does, to the prescribed extent of the reference. And that's the way the International Building Code uses standards. They're all listed in the back of the code, of course. They're developed in a consensus process, either ANSI or ASTM. The American Wood Council has standards referenced in the International Building Code, of course. First one listed here is the Fundamental Wood Structural Design Standard, the National Design Specification for Wood Construction. The second one is, we affectionately call it the SPIDWIZ, though it doesn't exactly fit the acronym, but it's the Special Design Provisions for Wind and Seismic. That contains the fundamental provisions for lateral load resisting systems, framing, sheathing, connections for diaphragms, shear walls, and also combined shear and uplift from wind. Wood frame construction manual, the third one, that's a engineered yet prescriptive document for 1 and 2 family dwellings. But we'll see as we go along, it also has some application for small commercial buildings. And then finally the span tables for joists and rafters, as we've always published. Chapter 6, of course, in the International Building Code defines the types of construction that we're dealing with. We're going to talk the wood frame construction types. Those are 5, 4, and 3. You still retain the Roman numeral designations for those. I wish they'd switch to the other myself, but there they are. And we'll talk about those as we go throughout, but there are specific applications also for wood in types 1 and 2. Type 5, we're all familiar with type 5 construction. It's usually wood frame. It can be any approved material. These buildings have the smallest footprint, smallest size. These have the least fire resistance ratings. And so type 5 construction is at the right end of table 601. We'll look at that table in a moment. Type 4 construction. Type 4 construction is getting a lot of attention these days. It is heavy timber. You can refer to type 4 as heavy timber construction. One of the distinguishing features of type 4 heavy timber is that the exterior walls must be of non-combustible materials or fire retardant treated wood traditionally. And under the 2015 code, now they can be something else, and that is cross-laminated timber. And I'll talk specifically about cross-laminated timber in a moment. It is protected cross-laminated timber in the exterior walls, meaning it is covered from the exterior. But in type 4, being heavy timber, it's a unique construction type. Besides the exterior walls, the interior must be minimum sizes of solid or structural composite lumber or solid lumber or laminated wood. And the other distinguishing feature about type 4 is it cannot have concealed spaces in the building. This is quite a challenge. In the current code cycle, we're working on a means of having protected concealed spaces in type 4 buildings based on similar provisions to what are in NFPA 13, the sprinkler standard for protecting concealed spaces of combustible construction. Here are the minimum dimensions for columns and beams and girders in type 4. Probably familiar with those. Flooring also has minimum dimensions in type 4, roof decking, and partitions. Here is the product that is causing a much conversation in regard to type 4. Because all of a sudden, cross-laminated timber is layers of dimension lumber or structural composite lumber laminated together in crosswise fashion. You see a picture of it here to make a solid wood floor or roof or wall section as you see it here. As you can tell, it has high structural capacity, a great leap in structural capacity compared to light frame construction. It also has high fire resistance given that it's solid wood. There's no concealed spaces between repetitive members in the walls or in the floors. So the combination of high structural capacity and high fire resistance make it a candidate for all kinds of buildings that before now it didn't make a lot of sense to have them out of wood, but now it does. So there's many notable buildings now around the world already built of cross-laminated timber, taller wood structures. We ourselves at AWC put forward a code change in this current code cycle regarding a special occupancy of 9 stories. It did not receive the 2/3 vote required at the public comment hearing to receive a recommendation from that hearing. It did receive a majority vote. It is still under consideration in the CDP access process. Lots of support, very positive approach to this. You can read about it. But more importantly, the International Code Council has sent out a request for comments. The Board of Directors wants to have a tall wood ad hoc committee, and they've sent out a request for comments. You can read that on the ICC website. And the whole focus of this effort, of course, is to decide what would be appropriate criteria for what essentially, in my opinion, needs to be a new construction type for this new building system. So that's going forward, and it's rather exciting. It does give wood opportunities and sustainable building, increased opportunities, and so forth, and all the other advantages that come with wood construction. Where do we stand now in the code? Well, in the 2015 code, it's type 4 buildings only. Now, it can be used in type 5 buildings. It's just not specifically described there, but since type 5 can be any approved material, based on it being manufactured in accordance with the code reference standard that you see here, ANSI APA 190.1, you can certainly use it in type 5. Type 4, you can use it with specific provisions regarding exterior walls. There are test reports available for fire resistance testing, and they are also ongoing. If you have questions about type 4 construction, of course, anytime we're more than happy to answer those. I'll move on to type 3. Type 3 also has the restriction of non-combustible exterior walls or fire retardant treated walls. In the 2015 code, CLT is not specifically designated in type 3 construction. 3A and 3B, of course, designate 1 hour and no specific rating in 3B. 1 and 2 construction, building materials for the most part, certainly the structural load bearing frame of the building is non-combustible.